Overlord Volume 3 Chapter 3 Confusion and Understanding. The first thing that Ains saw after teleporting was a hill. No, it was nothing as tall as a hill, it was more of a rise in the land, 6 meters tall at the very most. The raised land was covered in dense vegetation of the kind one might find on the plains, and it gave the impression of having been there for a long time. Many similar mounds dotted the landscape as far as one looked, giving the impression that they covered the surrounding region. Naturally, this was not the case. This landscape had been created by Mer, one of the guardians of the great tomb of Nazareth. The surface walls of the tomb were buried beneath these mounds. Ains cast a fly spell and flew over the heaped dirt. Within his expansive field of view, the only thing he could see was weed-strewn land, with no trace of the surface level of the great tomb of Nazareth. It was almost completely covered by soil. Ains did not linger over this scenery, but continued flying at his current speed. Once he reached a certain point, the scenery changed, and he felt as though he had pierced some sort of thin membrane. The hilly terrain vanished, and the familiar scenery of his home filled Ains' eyes. This was the sign that he had breached the protective layer of illusions. Without slowing the speed of his fly spell, Ains continued toward his destination, the largest mausoleum at the center. That was because it was the sole entrance to the great tomb of Nazareth. As he neared the bone-white steps of the mausoleum, he discovered countless forms beneath him. Suppressing his feelings of anxiety, he landed before them. "Welcome back, Ains Sama," said a gentle female voice. It was soon followed by a chorus of other greetings and welcomes. The woman in the pure white dress who stood before him was none other than Albedo, the guardian overseer of the great tomb of Nazareth. She was the one with the clearest picture of the current situation. The 4 maids behind her were members of the battle maids, Pleiades, and behind them were a line of level 80 vassals. After speaking to Albedo via a message spell, he had given Narbril her orders, and then teleported back immediately. The fact that Albedo could gather so many people to welcome Ains in 5 minutes spoke volumes of Albedo's skill as an administrator. Filled with respect for that fact, Ains raised his hand and waved in response to his vassal's greetings. Perhaps he should have said a couple of words in thanks, but that was not suitable given the circumstances. "Albedo, about what you said through the message, had Shaltir really betrayed them?" He wanted to ask that question, but hesitated to do so. Unease surged within him. He feared that if he asked about her betrayal, he would find that it was true. In addition, it was too dangerous to discuss this matter in front of the vassals. "Yes, shall we discuss it elsewhere?" "That's right, we should speak of it in the throne room, no?" "Indeed." Then Yuri, present Ains Sama with his ring. A bespectacled maid stepped forward from the maids lined up behind her. Yuri wore the same basic combat ready-made uniform that Narbril did, but there were some differences in her outfit. Narbril's made uniform was designed to protect its wearer, but Yuri's outfit prioritized ease of movement. The proof of that could be seen in the lack of metal parts on the front of her skirt. Her metal gauntlets were covered in spikes, and all she had to do was clench her fists to turn them into deadly weapons. Her wide blue choker was decorated with a small, translucent gemstone. It radiated a light from within, which shimmered and flickered as though cast by a flame. Her hair was done up in a bun behind her, and her prim features were cool and elegant, giving her an air of wisdom. She was Yuri Alpha, assistant leader of the Pleiades battle maids. As the male Sabas was their leader, it would not be wrong to consider her the manager of the Pleiades. She held a tray in both hands, which was draped with a purple satin cloth. The cloth itself bore a ring, the ring of Ains' old gown. Ains picked up the ring, and placed it upon his ring finger. This ring permitted its wearer to freely teleport throughout the great tomb of Nazareth. Ains removed it during any excursion to the outside world, because he feared that it might be stolen. As he looked at the ring upon his skeletal finger, Ains nodded, as though in approval. The discomfort of not wearing it for several days vanished, replaced by a supreme satisfaction. "Then, let us go, Albedo." He could not directly teleport into the throne room, so he used the ring's power to send him to the room, the Lemmageton, which directly adjoined the throne room. After opening the massive doors, Ains entered in the company of Albedo, heading for the crystal throne. As he walked, Ains asked the question he had been pondering just now. Then, before we start, I have some questions for you. You said that Shaltir betrayed us, then, when she betrayed us, how did Sabas, who was in the same place at her, react? Did he not betray us along with her? Yes. There were no signs of his betrayal. Then, did you question Sabas about the matter? I did, and he finished his report to me. According to Sabas, they encountered a group of bandits. After that, Shaltir headed toward the bandits' hideout in order to capture them. Nothing suspicious occurred during that time, and she vocally proclaimed her intent to render loyal service to you, Ain Sama. I see. In other words, something happened after that which made her decide to betray us. Yes, in addition, she brought 2 vampire brides with her. However, they seem to have been destroyed. Is that so? But mooks like that, no, that means something happened which destroyed them. Then, I'll summarize what happened on my end. Ains had almost finished his report by the time they reached the stairs to the throne. However, he had not gotten to the events of the tomb yet, so he continued speaking. After it was all finished, Albedo, who had been listening attentively and silently, nodded in acknowledgement. Ains wanted to ask if he had handled the situation well, but there was something more important that he wished to know. He looked to the throne and recited the designated password. Master Source, open. A translucent window appeared before his eyes. It looked like the console, but was completely different from it. The window had multiple pages within it, each covered in densely packed characters. This was the administration system for the Great Tomb of Nazareth. It recorded the daily maintenance costs, the numbers and types of vassals present, all sorts of magical traps, gimmicks and other such things. One could exert large-scale control over them all from here. While they had still been in Yggdrasil, one could access this system from anywhere, but after some experimentation, Ains found that in this world, the system could only be operated from the heart of the dungeon, the throne room. Although it's troublesome to have to come here every time, at least I have the ring to teleport me, so it's not such a big deal. With practiced movements, Ains brought up and enlarged the NPC status page. This page recorded the names of all the NPCs made by the guild members. After changing the sorting method from alphabetical, katakana, order to level order, from highest to lowest, Ains' eyes traveled down the list, and then his eyes halted on a single spot. Then, he silently turned his gaze to Albedo's face. Yes, it has become like this. Amidst a sea of names written in white, only Shaltir Bloodfallen's name was shown in black. Ains knew what this change meant, but he looked over it twice, 3 times, and after realizing that his eyes had not been mistaken, he screamed impossible. Within his heart. If his skeletal face could display an expression, it would be one of shock. Is she dead? Ains continued questioning Albedo. In his heart of hearts, he hoped that something had happened to the system when they had been brought to this world. However, the truth Albedo spoke was unbearably cruel. If she were dead, her name would have vanished and left a blank space. In all likelihood, this represents betrayal. Well, that's right. As Ains replied thusly to Albedo, he recalled the meaning of this change when he had last seen it in Yggdrasil. Albedo called it betrayal, but that was slightly different from what the system was displaying. Indeed, broadly speaking, it was similar to betrayal, but this color change occurred when a third party used mind control to temporarily make an NPC take hostile actions. Impossible. Ains voiced that denial in his heart once more. Shaltir and Ains were both undead, which meant that they were of races that were immune to all sorts of mind-affecting effects. How had Shaltir been mind-controlled then? It was easier to accept the fact that Shaltir had simply betrayed Nazareth. For example, she might have been unhappy with her treatment, and someone on the outside might have offered her better terms, thus leading to her treachery. If that was not the case, it meant that something had happened when they had come to this world which was outside the scope of Ains' knowledge. Ains recalled Nfiria's face. Indeed, perhaps a talent holder like himself with some unknown power could have affected an undead mind. Could this be the effect of some being, phenomenon, or special effect that is unique to this world? That is unclear. However, Shaltyr's betrayal is clear enough, so I propose that we assemble a strike force immediately. At this moment Ains suddenly realized something. Could it be that the vassals who had welcomed Ains back were intended to eliminate Shaltyr? As he brought them back to mind, he noticed that there were many vassals among them who were a rare sight in Nazarick, the ones who possessed holy elemental attacks which were effective against the undead. Albedo continued in a voice that seemed to be made of steel. I wish to nominate myself as the commander of this expedition, and, if you permit it, I would like to have Cositus as my executive officer, and include Mare in our forces, Ain Sama. These choices were perfect for destroying Shaltyr. It was clear that Albedo was very serious about this. Shaltyr Bloodfallen was very strong. In fact, she was the strongest of the Guardians, barring Gargantua. Therefore, one would need the team members selected by Albedo to be absolutely certain of defeating her, or else one would have a very hard time. Do you approve? No, it's too soon to come to that conclusion. Let us verify the reasons behind Shaltyr's betrayal first. You are indeed compassionate, Ain Sama. However, as long as anyone faces the supreme beings with hostility, there is no need to show them any mercy. That's not correct, Albedo. It is not that I am showing mercy to Shaltyr, but I simply do not understand why she would betray us. If this sort of thing could happen to anyone other than Shaltyr, he had to figure out a way to deal with it. If she was unhappy with how she had been treated, then the same thing might happen to the other vassals. Thus, he would have to take the appropriate measures to nip it in the bud. If this were the result of some sort of domination ability from a talent, he would also need to figure out some way to counteract it. When he heard from the message that an NPC created by his friends had betrayed him, he felt as though he had been condemned by everyone, the other guild members, as a guildmaster. So great was the shock that he had nearly fallen to his knees. However, this was no longer a simple matter of being rebuked by others. He had to solve this problem not as a guildmaster, but in his capacity as the absolute ruler of the great tomb of Nazarick. It was far too early to despair, and if, though it was impossible, Shaltyr had actually been mind-controlled, then he needed to save her. A superior who put on a high and mighty face, but did not save his subordinates, while they were in trouble was not fit to be a leader. Ains was his subjects' ruler, and he had to protect them. Then, do you know where Shaltyr is? Have you pinpointed her location? My sincerest apologies, but we have not confirmed that yet. I considered that Shaltyr might attack Nazarick, so I had her direct subordinates placed under arrest, and dispatched other vassals to reinforce the first floor. Really now? Then, let's go visit your elder sister to see if we can divine Shaltyr's location. Part 2. The fifth floor of the Great Tomb of Nazarick was an extremely cold region that had been modeled after a glacier. A bluish-white iceberg stood in the middle of an endless expanse of white land, like a tombstone. It seemed to glow from within and confused the senses. Snow fell from the heavy, overcast sky above, whipped into a mad dance by the freezing wind which carried frozen vapors on its gusts. In the distance was a frozen forest covered in snow, which looked like giants clad in robes of purest white. The bone-chilling wind ruffled Ain's clothing, which fluttered in the wind. Albedo stood beside him, and as he eyed the way she was dressed, Ains asked, "Aren't you cold? If you need to, you can put on your armor. We should still have time for that." Ains was completely immune to all forms of cold elemental attacks. He would not be chilled or frozen regardless of how low the temperature went. However, Albedo was a different matter. If she was in her full battle panoply, mere freezing gusts like this would not harm her, but she was currently wearing a white dress. He had asked her about this before teleporting, but he had come away with the feeling that she was just trying to put on a brave front. However, Ains simply smiled gently in response to Ain's worries. "Thank you for your concern, Ains Sama, but it is not necessary. Mere cold like this is not a problem." Ains nodded and replied, "I see." Normally, there would be an environmental effect here which applied cold damage and slowed movement. However, operating it required money, so it had been left deactivated. Perhaps she had simply been lucky that they had made that decision early on. Or was it because Albedo had some sort of magic item, or skill that negated cold damage? In truth, the NPCs were equipped by the guild members who designed them. There were only a few of them which Ains could confidently say he understood thoroughly, apart from Pandora's actor. That said, he had gone over all their data after coming to this new world. Questions filled Ains' mind as he looked at the majestic two-story mansion before him. This building seemed strangely out of place in this frozen land. It was like a house from a storybook, and seemed to be surrounded by a fairy tale atmosphere. However, its surface was covered in a layer of ice, giving it an uncomfortably cold aura. In fact, the name of this building was about as far from a fairy tale as one could get. Its name was the Frozen Prison. All of Nazarik's enemies were locked up here. Let's go. With those simple words, Ains pushed open the frozen main gate. Though it was covered in a thick layer of ice, the gate still opened easily, as though it were welcoming a visitor. A wave of cold air washed over them in the instant the gate opened. This was because the interior of the prison was colder than even the freezing environs outside. It was only after the chilling wind swept over her that Albedo began shivering. As Ains saw this, he reached into his pocket dimension, and withdrew a crimson cape, whose hem was decorated with flame-like patterns. Wear this, Albedo. It is not highly enchanted, but it should be enough to ward off the cold. To think you would lavish such a gift upon me. My deepest thanks. I shall treasure it all my life. Ains had not said that he would give it to her, but after seeing Albedo's radiant smile, Ains could not muster up any words, but instead looked to the other side of the open gate. A silent, dark passage extended within. Right, the surviving members of the Sunlight Scripture should be in here. Yes. Neuronist should be watching them closely. Ah, how warm, it feels like you're hugging me, Ains-sama, Kokoku. Really now? That's wonderful. I doubt being embraced by skinless and fleshless arms like mine would feel warm, but of course Ains did not say that. At the very least, he knew that it would not be appropriate at the present moment. As Albedo wriggled and twisted around in the cape, wrapping it around herself so tightly she almost vanished into its folds, Ains strode forth. What are you doing? We're running out of time, under these circumstances. Yes. Ains' passive skill Undead Blessing allowed him to sense all the undead lurking within the compound. Since it was annoying, Ains disabled the skill in order to ignore the presence of the undead as he walked down the freezing, blue-white passage. People without countermeasures against movement impairment might end up tripping and falling on the completely frozen-over corridor. Ains-sama, shall I summon Neuronist? It is unthinkable that she would not come to lead the way, thus forcing the Supreme Overlord of Nazarik to advance by himself. It's fine. Though it's not a bad thing, she talks too much. There is a matter we need to settle as soon as possible, and I would like to avoid wasting time. Understood. Then, after all this is over, I will lecture Neuronist and caution her not to babble too much. No, there's no need for that. It does not displease me. But, Ains smiled bitterly as he watched Albedo furrow her brows from her place beside him. As her master, he appreciated the fact that she was thinking of him, but if she did that, his subordinates might not dare complain in future. It is fine. I love you all, regardless of your merits or flaws, because you were all made by my friends of the past. The fault is mine for being unhappy with such meticulously crafted people. Indeed, if Shaltir had betrayed them because her backstory had been designed that way, then he had to forgive her for it. That was because she was simply obeying the will of her creator, Peroroncino. However, he did not seem like the type who would plant bad seeds in the guild. All this confused Ains, because Peroroncino was a man who liked joking around and disliked ruining relationships between his friends. If that's the case, then it should be an external reason after all, no? The way the text was displayed represents that she was mind-controlled, although I can't rule out the fact that it might have been a part of her settings I wasn't sure about, or a change in her settings which happened after coming to this world. Besides, I didn't memorize the personality profiles of all the NPCs, and their personalities seem quite similar to those of their creators. I guess nobody could program them without personalities, so that might be why. If that's the case, then Shaltir, could it be that she had something like a time bomb built into her settings? Her creator liked H-games, so maybe he programmed some kind of event into her which needed to be solved with a walkthrough. That sounds quite likely. Ain sighed weakly, and then he finally realized the oddity in the behavior of the woman next to him. She was looking forward and walking, but unlike just now, she was not matching his stride. And while her eyes were facing forward, they were not focused on any particular place. Ains heard Albedo mumbling something, and he strained to listen. I love you. I love you. I love you. She was repeating those words over and over again, like a broken record. Oi, Albedo. I said I loved you all. That refers to everyone, right? Albedo turned her head toward him in a strange manner. But that means you love me too, right?